Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rebuild with Confidence Divorce Summit. I'm your host, Lisa Grace. The goal of this summit is to help individuals find hope and optimism during the midst of their divorce and beyond. But before we dive in, let me share a personal story. I stood before God and said these words: I, Lisa, take you, husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. As my marriage deteriorated, causing everyone pain, an aspect of my emotional overwhelm was my belief that I was committing the ultimate sin in the eyes of God. I had grown up with the belief that God hates divorce. This caused me a lot of shame and regret and slowed my healing process. I now know that God does not love the sanctity of marriage more than He loves me. Let me say that again. God does not love the sanctity of marriage more than He loves me. With that, I'm incredibly excited to have Gretchen Baskerville, author of the book, The Life-Saving Divorce, Hope for People Leaving Destructive Relationships, with us today. We will challenge those beliefs, explore a different perspective, and provide hope for those navigating a faith-based divorce. Gretchen is a divorce recovery leader and researcher with over 20 years of experience helping Christian men and women going through difficult, life-saving divorces. She listens with compassion to those who have suffered from domestic violence, betrayal, infidelity, and emotional abuse, helping broken people find strength, courage, and healing. And guess what? She's a survivor herself, having walked through her own life-saving divorce. Today, she's happily remarried and writes about divorce recovery. Gretchen holds a degree in Bible and Christian education. So sit back and relax and get ready for an enlightening conversation. Together we'll discover the power of hope, resilience, and the path to a brighter future. Welcome, Gretchen.
Hi, thank you so much, Lisa.
And so I am so excited, Gretchen, to have you. You have my heart. You had my heart when I, and we'll go to our questions, but you had my heart when it was a light bulb moment when you said, God doesn't love the sanctity of marriage more than He loves me. And we will get there, but I just want to start out with anyone listening that's a true statement.
Yeah. God's not so interested in your marital status as He is in you loving and serving Him. So, and that's important to remember.
Yes. So Gretchen, what inspired you to write the Life-Saving Divorce book?
Well, will you allow me to tell a little bit about my own story?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, I was one of those goody two-shoes Christian girls. I never drank or smoked or gave my parents any reason to worry growing up. I was a good student. I mainly got into trouble by staying up past midnight reading my Bible.
Ooh.
Yeah. Okay. So I was one of those teenagers who eagerly went to the Gothard seminars. This was back in the 1970s when our church would bus us to the Gothard seminars. My parents weren't involved at all. They weren't interested in him whatsoever, but I was one of those godly teens and I wanted to give God, everything. So I went to Wheaton College. I got my degree in Bible and Christian education, and I was absolutely convinced that I would do marriage right. And so I met my husband to be at church, the church I had attended since I was 7 years old. Now, he did reveal some troubling things as we were dating. And I thought, oh, well, then we need to go to premarital counseling with a pastor. And that's what we did. And we were honest about our lives. And the pastor, even though there were some red flags, the pastor felt that any marriage between two Christians would turn out just fine. Sure, a few ups and downs, but it would turn out fine. And he also believed that the love of Jesus in my heart would overcome the childhood trauma my husband had experienced. And he also felt that my stable background from growing up in a really good, fabulous, loving Christian family with no abuse would inspire my husband to grow in godliness. Well, you can see where this story's going, can't you? We even went through the #1 best-selling Christian premarital book. It was a workbook called, Before You Say I Do. And it never mentioned the word abuse or serial infidelity, or that any kind of Christian marriage between Christians could ever become destructive or dangerous. And it was like all of that is ignored in our Christian world, or really downplayed. We did everything right. My fiance got my father's permission to marry me, and I walked down the aisle in my beautiful white wedding gown. I was so excited, and I was very sexually attracted to my new husband. But within a few months, I knew something was terribly wrong. By the end of the first year, the pastor who had done our premarital counseling and had married us came to me and apologized to me for encouraging the union. But what was I going to do? I am a devout, conservative Christian girl. I'm stuck, right? It's over. I'm going to have to be in this marriage forever. Um, I was, when you're a devout believer, I did believe that Jesus, allowed divorce for sexual immorality. But in my church, it was a sign that you didn't take the sanctity of marriage seriously. If you divorced, even if you did have biblical grounds. So you were either, you didn't believe in the sanctity of marriage, or you were just spiritually immature. And I didn't want to be seen as either of those. And so, because a spiritually mature person, of course, in their way of thinking, would hold on for the miracle. God would do a miracle. Now, they never actually said, God will completely fix this, but they came this close to it. They always implied that, God would do a miracle. So I was stuck, even though the Bible said that I was free to go. And so over the next, many years, there were many, many incidents: lying, deception, sexual immorality, even criminal behavior. And by that time, I had 2 children, and they were under 6 years old, and I just couldn't leave. I just, you're exhausted. Young mothers are exhausted. And we went to Christian counseling with 5 different counselors over, 10 years. And we even did an inpatient treatment program, and it didn't help for more than 90 days. And the other thing I believed that kept me in this marriage was that divorce universally destroys children. And I love my babies. I was willing to sacrifice my life and my sanity to protect theirs. I stayed and continued trying because I had been fed information that wasn't correct. Divorce does not universally destroy children in these highly, highly toxic situations. In marriages that are toxic or highly toxic, leaving can result in your child's well-being being 10 times higher than if you had stayed. So, and that's even counting the difficulties of divorce. There's no doubt that divorce is painful and it hurts. It hurts the parents. It hurts the kids. There's no doubt that divorce has its effect, but abuse can be up to 10 times greater. And so that is something nobody ever told us. Focus on the Family doesn't tell us that. Christian authors don't tell us that. And that's an important factor we need to know when we're making life and death decisions. So you ask me, what I eventually did divorce, by the way. There was one last shattering incident, and that was 25 years ago. And out of sheer desperation, I asked my husband to leave. I was so numb. I was so desperate. I just had to get him out. Get out of this house. Get out of our neighborhood. Get out of my church. Just go. Can't have you in my life. You are too destructive. You're too dangerous. And so I didn't want a divorce. I didn't have happy, grass is greener kind of thoughts. I was numb. I was broken. I was crying all the time. I thought that I had a black cloud over my head. I felt like that the generations would be cursed because of my divorce. I thought that I'd never be happy again. And I was absolutely convinced that my children would be emotional basket cases and juvenile delinquents by the time they were 16. And of course, because we were lied to and told those things, it was a shock to me that none of that happened. My kids are adults today. This is 25 years later. Both finished their educations. They're good people. They're good employees. They're good neighbors. They're hard workers. Their bosses love them. They both get consistent raises and promotions. And wait a second, that wasn't supposed to happen. Divorce was supposed to universally destroy kids. And my kids turned out great. Now, I know that's not true for everyone, but 8 in 10 kids of divorce turn out just fine. But no one ever told us that. Why didn't anyone ever tell us that?
That's a statistic that people need to say.
Yeah.
Truly. So at what point, so thank you, number one, that background in your story. I have coached other women that are actually married to pastors that have that similar story. And it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And
this story is heartbreaking, and it's a story that's common.
And I've had friends who have been ousted by their church They've been scorned. They've been looked down upon. They have to sit in the back row with a scarlet D on their shoulder, on their chest. And
Yep.
it's not what my Jesus is all about. And that's what I love about your research and your boldness to buck the system, So I would say my next question for you is, what is a life-saving divorce?
Right. And that is a good question. Okay. So being brought up in the church, we were kind of given the impression that 95% of divorces were frivolous or falling out of love divorces, Hollywood style divorces, and only maybe 5%. I mean, they never used these exact numbers, but that was the impression. I mean, my church did acknowledge that there were some situations that were so bad you had to get out, but they made it sound like it was an incredibly small number, like maybe 5%. But it turns out that about half of United States divorces are for really those serious reasons: a pattern of sexual infidelity, a pattern of physical violence, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, coercive control, child sexual abuse, child abuse. I mean, these are really serious matters, and about half of divorces in America are for those serious reasons. The other that comes up really high is addictions, drug and alcohol addictions, those family crushing addictions where this person who's supposed to love you and be committed to the family is actually squandering the family rent money and the grocery money. They're stealing the silver, the wedding silver to sell for drugs. So that, and then abandonment. We have both physical and basically neglect of duty kinds of abandonment. Those are the very serious reasons for divorce. So I'm not saying that all divorces are that way. I believe, as a devout Christian, I believe there are frivolous divorces.
Mhm.
I believe there are selfish and immature divorces, but I also believe in life-saving divorces. So that's where I draw the line. There are plenty of studies that show it's about 50%. Each study's a little bit different, but that's kind of where it all falls out.
Yeah. It actually, I think we're going to touch on this, but it actually can be a sin to stay in that destructive. It's not what God wants us. He doesn't want us to stay there and just be abused. And I think he gives us people like you and resources to understand that it's okay. You've done everything. There's that saying, the pastor, and there's a flood, and God, please save me. Well, I'm going to send a guy with a canoe. Okay, I'm waiting for God to save me, and that comes with a speedboat. I'm waiting for God. Okay, I'm coming, with a helicopter. God, how come you didn't save me? Well, I sent you 3 people, to save you. And we need to be open to these resources and reach out to people. I think because of this topic, Gretchen, Christian women and or men, they isolate because there's so much shame,
right,
that they've grown up with. Thou shalt not divorce. Which leads me to my next question. Can you see I'm a little passionate about this?
Yes, I can see you're passionate about it, and I agree with you.
What was the true intent of the certificate of divorce in the times of Moses?
Okay, wow. So we're going back to Old Testament times. So this predates Jesus quite a bit, right? So we know that a certificate of divorce was given for the hardness of hearts, right? So Jewish culture was a little bit different from Roman culture, which was at the time of Jesus, and was different from Assyrian culture. And what they did is to let the world know, this is before driver's license numbers, Social Security, and computers, that you were truly available to marry. Women had to have a certificate of divorce if their husband wanted to get rid of them. And it's kind of an interesting story. Prior to Jesus, through all of the Old Testament times, only a man could enact a divorce. And what most people don't realize is that Moses actually commanded divorce twice. So there's a passage in Exodus where he says, here's how women need to be treated. And if you have a first wife and you take a second wife and you reduce the first wife's food, clothing, marital rights, you have to let her go. You can't treat her that way. You either treat her right or you let her go. And you can imagine that this would be a real temptation for men. So let's say that wife number 2 is younger and hotter and, better looking. And wife number 1 is, maybe she's a really good cook. So he wants to keep wife number 1 around, but he's not going to treat her right. Moses says, nope, that's not an option. You don't get to keep a wife around and treat her badly. And in this particular passage in Exodus 10, Moses is talking about women with few resources. So these are wives whose fathers owed somebody wealthy a lot of money, and the father didn't have the wherewithal to pay back the lender. So all he had was his daughter. So this is a wife who isn't even necessarily loved by the lender, right? She's just a debt repayment, but even then, even if he didn't woo her or win her over or write her love letters on pottery or whatever they did, he still has to treat her right. That wasn't an option in the time of Moses, to take advantage of her and call yourself married. You had to give her a certificate of divorce so she could leave. And you're probably hinting around about, and maybe I'm wrong, there were situations where a man would get away with it. He would, and these women were basically shackled or anchored, as it were, to these men. And they were called, a woman like this was called, oh, she's the aguna. She's aguna. She's anchored to a man who doesn't love her, doesn't care for her. He's divorced. He should have obeyed the law of Moses and divorced her and given her a certificate of divorce and let her go, but he didn't. He was too selfish. He was too abusive. And there's some funny stories in rabbinic literature. They actually tell the story where if the woman's, maybe she was lucky enough to have a family, maybe not, if somebody petitioned the court and said, hey, you can't let this happen to this woman. This is my daughter, or this is my sister or something. The court would actually find someone who would literally beat with sticks, the abusive man, selfish man, until he volunteered to give her a certificate of divorce. I mean, what a story. That's what it took to because there's this idea that abusers want to divorce. No. Abusers don't want a divorce. They love their lives exactly as they are. And so another story from the law of Moses is in Deuteronomy, where a man is in battle. He's victorious. His side collects up a bunch of POWs, some prisoners of war, and he sees a cute woman and he says, oh, I like her. He's not allowed to just take her home and rape her. He has to let her, he has to give her the dignity of mourning for her parents, for her home, and he has to wait 30 days, and he can marry her. Now, what typically happens, when you marry someone from a different culture, you probably don't speak the same language. And the law of Moses was concerned about these women. These are low status women, right? The woman who was used as a debt repayment and the woman who's a POW. She wasn't given a dowry by her dad. Her dad was probably killed in this military action. She's got nothing. She is a low status wife. And so what these men would do, because they knew she didn't have anyone to speak up for her, to stand up for her, they would say, I really don't like her that much anymore, and I don't want to pay for the food and the clothing and do right by her. I'm going to send her over to my brother's farm, and I'm going to have her work out in the fields or tend his goats. I mean, I don't want her around. I've got, hot chick wife number 2. I don't want this woman around. And Moses says, no, can't do that. If you don't love her, if you're not going to take care of her, you need to give her a certificate of divorce and let her go wherever she wishes, which might be back to her, the other, her home country, or she might stay and she would remarry. Always a certificate of divorce was a sign, I am available to remarry. I am legally able to remarry. And so we need to understand this. The third incident in the Old Testament where divorce is actually commanded is for spiritual adultery. Remember Nehemiah, when the people returned to Jerusalem from exile, they started intermarrying with, Canaanite women. And basically Nehemiah said, you have to divorce those women because they are leading you into spiritual apostasy. Isn't that interesting? 3 places in the Bible where divorce is actually commanded. And it has to do with the relationship, right? So I don't see in the Bible where it says, your greatest goal in life is to be married. In fact, Jesus and Paul say the opposite, that it's better to stay single. And so, in fact, if we want to go that far, let's take it even one step further. When the Sadducees came to Jesus with this very complex question about a woman who'd married one brother and then he died, and she got married to the next brother and he died, and she got married to the next brother and he died. And they said to Jesus, so whose wife is she in heaven? And Jesus was just disgusted. He said, basically, there is no marriage and no giving in marriage in heaven. So even if you had a wonderful marriage on earth, guess what? You're going to go to heaven and there is no marriage and no giving in marriage. So,
I like that.
It's the quality of the relationship that matters to God. Is it loving and respectful and a safe nest against the storm? Or is there betrayal, abuse, unfaithfulness, a defiled marriage bed? I mean, God cares about the quality of the marriage.
And we're getting there. This is a great lead in, but when I was going through my divorce, one of the things that was of comfort to me is that I can do more single than I can married. And I thought, well, heck, there's hope. There's hope for being single. There's hope for God still loving me. There's hope. I mean, that passage alone was inspiring to me. There's just so much mistruths that we've grown up with. And yeah, so the certificate of divorce was granted in my mind because God loves women.
Yes. He wanted to protect them.
He did. So our Heavenly Father loves us so much that he created the certificate of divorce. So for it to be such a taboo,
Right.
if we go, like you said, and thank you for explaining that so well, when we go back, the harden of heart, the mistreatment, the abuse, the neglect, that's why the certificate of divorce was created.
Right. And Jesus affirmed that.
Yes.
Through the hardness of heart. And notice how some Christian authors turn that around. I found that in the book Lies Women Believe. The author accuses the poor abuse victim who wants to get away of being hard-hearted, and you just go, honey, the hard-hearted person is the abuser, is the cheater, is the addict, is the abandoner. The poor invested wife, and in some cases it's the husband, right? We do know that they're male victims of abuse. She's not the hard-hearted one. She's desperate to save her life and sanity and that of her children. So yeah, I agree with you. There's just been a lot of misteachings and misunderstandings.
Gretchen, I'm just so glad you're here because you had me at hello, you had me at the title of your book, and I'll get there again later on. But your website is full of resources that to me will bring peace to so many women who have been brought up in church that are being abused, and men that, which leads to my next question, I feel pretty well. Explain that God does not love the sanctity of marriage more than he loves us, and how churches get it wrong. And you've kind of alluded to that a little bit, but
yeah, I mean, does God really, when you come to the pearly gates, I mean, I don't really believe in the pearly gates, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Is he going to say, now, what is your marital status? I think, is your marital status more important to God than your, care for the least of these? Is it more important than your personal godliness and righteousness? I mean, the truth of the matter is that we've already gone over that God cares about the quality of the marriage. It wasn't just enough that woman was married to the man. If he wasn't going to treat her right, God says, basically that's a mockery. You're hard-hearted. And we find that in other, Bible verses. So I think that, God loves you. You are his precious daughter. I'm assuming most of the people who listen to you are women. But for the men out there, and I have known plenty of husbands who've been abused, you are God's precious son. You are God's precious child. He never wanted this for you. And what we have to do is, when we're in these relationships and when we've been told that we have to stay, what we ended up doing is colluding with sin. We cover up sin. We make it easier for him to sin. We lie. We call his boss and say he's sick when he's really drunk or hungover. We enable the sin to thrive. And we don't tell our churches, because what do? Well, honey, if you just had a more positive attitude, or if you would just forgive and forget, you would turn around. No. The Bible tells us that we should not associate with greedy or sexually immoral or abusive or, people swindling people. We shouldn't even eat with them. We shouldn't associate with them or even eat with them. And so we are, by staying, and I don't want to heap any guilt on anyone. Okay. I realize that all this information is probably new to some of you.
Yeah.
And I may be opening your eyes or confirming something you've just started to feel. I don't want anyone to feel guilty for staying as long as you have in a highly toxic marriage. Given the lies and the misinformation we were told, we did the absolute best we could with the information we had. It is not our fault. And so it's really, I think it's important that we realize that for our own children's mental health, we may have to leave. For their own physical safety, we may have to leave. And furthermore, even our own. There's been some very interesting studies that those who divorce out of a long-term, long negative, abusive marriage will be, these researchers actually say you will be happier, whether you remarry or not, if you leave a long-term toxic marriage. And they were studying people who've been married 10 years or longer. There's no magical formula. I'm just giving you the averages.
Right.
But we were told we had to stay, and it was all due to misinformation. It's shocking. It's very shocking.
It completely is. And all that you've said with the Old Testament and God's love for us, he commanded us to. It's more of a sin to stay than not. I'll just cut to the chase.
I think for some people it can, and you know what? It is not for anyone outside other than the person themselves to determine when that right time is to go. I mean, did I have grounds for divorce the first year? Yes, I did. Was it a sin for me to stay? Well, I didn't know the truth. I was just trying to be faithful to the Lord. And I think God honors that. I think God honors what we do with our best intentions. But it also means that probably we have to apologize to our children and say, I'm really sorry I kept you in that situation for so long. I really didn't know. I really thought I was doing the right thing.
100%. And our children will thrive. I mean, that emotional, the lack of trust, the insecurity, the walking on eggshells is not good for a child.
Right. Exactly.
Even though, we've got to stay married. We're causing more harm.
Yeah. And what you just brought up is so important. We're causing more harm in those situations that are toxic and highly toxic. I want to be 100% honest with everybody. Divorcing a divorce just due to low commitment, like you never were really hot on marriage anyway, a divorce in very low conflict, medium conflict homes where the children actually do feel loved and accepted, those are actually really bad for children. Those divorces are extremely destructive. They are almost universally destructive. But the divorces to leave a very a toxic or highly toxic home are not. So, or at least I'll say on average, your mileage may vary, right? Each person listening to this knows the personalities of your own children. You know their mental health. You know what you can take. You know what they can take. And that's why the decision has got to be yours. You can't take, your friend doesn't get to weigh in. Your pastor doesn't get to weigh in. Even us divorce coaches that don't get to weigh in. It is 100% your decision.
100%. Absolutely. So Malachi 2:16, will you explain the true meaning behind Malachi and its relevance to modern divorce? For God hates divorce.
Right. That's what you're referring to, the old God hates divorce verse. Well, hang on tight, because I'm going to probably blow people's minds here. I need to look at my notes for just a second because I'm going to get all the
this is so good.
All right. So we were not actually taught that divorce was the unpardonable sin, but it was all, it put this black mark on your record for some churches, for even some Bible study organizations. Just being divorced, even if you were the innocent party, removed you from leadership. You were disqualified. So this even if it's not the unpardonable sin, our churches treated it that way, and many parachurch organizations did too. So, okay, get out your pen and paper, because I'm not speaking to you, Lisa, but so the people.
No, I've got it. I'm right here.
Okay, the interpretation of Malachi 2:16, the old God hates divorce verse, has only been around for 385 years, and people are going to go, what? No, that's the oldest and most traditional interpretation of Malachi 2:16. No, sorry, it's not. Malachi 2:16 was written nearly 2,500 years ago. Okay. And prior to the king, let me go back. So for the first 2,100 years, Malachi 2:16 was interpreted as an anti-treachery verse. Okay. It was a verse condemning men who merely divorced their wives because they hated them, not because there was any real just reason. And the Bible absolutely had reasons for a just divorce, right? And everybody understood them. So for the first 2,100 years of Bible translation, when the Bible was translated into Greek and Syriac and Aramaic and all the other languages in the ancient Near East, it was never translated, or it was never interpreted as God hates divorce. So fast forward 2,100 years, and there was a change. So up until this change, the one doing the hating was the husband, and the one being hated was the wife. Okay. So every time you saw Malachi 2:16, it was talking about a husband unjustly hating a wife. Okay. So it was a treacherous situation. In 1611, something happened. King James the First of England, his Bible translated it, changed it. And up until then, Martin Luther, John Calvin, John Wycliffe, Jerome, they all translated Malachi 2:16, or they all interpreted Malachi 2:16 as an anti-treachery verse. They never interpreted it as God hates divorce. So King James Version, and remember who King James was. His mother was executed by the daughter of King Henry VIII. And what do we know King Henry VIII for doing? Divorcing and remarrying. I mean, how many wives did that guy have? So you can understand why King James may have had that as a motivation. Listen, this guy introduced divorce into our church, and I'm going to shut the door to that. So his version of the Bible was the very first one that we know of that interpreted that Bible verse as the one doing the hating is God, and the thing being hated was divorce. So he's the one who invented, or not him, I mean, it was his translating team. He's the first one to interpret it as God hates divorce or I hate divorce. So that carried on for the next 385 years. That's why you and I and everybody around us who's Christian thinks, anybody, born in the last 385 years, we all think that this is the oldest and most reliable and most traditional way of interpreting this verse. And it's not. So what has changed? Well, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in the 1940s, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in caves along the Dead Sea. And why is this important? Well, I have a Bible degree, and your pastor will tell you that we want to get back as, there weren't computers. So we have to rely on really good copies. The original texts of the Bible are, have been, destroyed by the sands of time, that's just what happens when you write things on animal skins. They eventually just decay. So people would copy the Bible over and over and over and make copies for other people. And there were whole groups of monks and who would make copies of the Bible. And they tried to do it extremely accurately. Anyway, the oldest known copy of the book of Malachi, or of the Bible in general, the Old Testament especially in general, is from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, wow.
So those should be the closest thing we've got to the original copies, right? The original, Moses or whoever scribes. Okay, write this. And so everybody really wanted to see what this verse and many other verses were like in these incredibly old copies of the Bible. And it took them like 50 years to completely go and release this to the general public. And finally, what they concluded was it doesn't say God hates divorce. Again, those early translators were right. It's all about men who unjustly divorce their wives just because they hate them or dislike them. And so guess what? Nobody made a big fanfare about this, but since 1996, after these things were published, the results were published, no new major Bible translation says God hates divorce or I hate divorce.
Okay.
Not a single one. So let me give you some examples. The new NIV, New International Version, 2011 update, no longer says God hates divorce or I hate divorce.
That's
the English Standard Version, the Bible published by the Reformed crowd, the Crossway Press, that and used by the Presbyterian churches, it does not say God hates divorce. It talks about a man who hates and divorces his wife unjustly. Guess what? The Christian Standard Bible. This is the Bible translated by Lifeway. Lifeway is the name of the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. It doesn't say God hates divorce or I hate divorce. It too talks about men who unjustly divorce their wives. So now somebody's going to say, wait a second, Gretchen, I have an NIV Bible and let me flip it over. And sure enough, it does say, I hate divorce, says the Lord. And I will say, yes, you have a Bible that was printed before 2011, before NIV before the NIV translators said, oh, we better update this to reflect the findings of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we have, and I don't think anybody was deliberately trying to mislead us. It's just people didn't know. People never asked. And there was no big fanfare made in 1996 when all these large major Bible translations changed things. Has every older translation changed it? No, but NIV did.
I love it, Gretchen. That right there is gold. That is gold. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and bringing that forward in this interview, because it's fascinating. It's fascinating to have the history of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's fascinating to have the reference of the translation. It's fascinating to know that anything published after 2011 is going to be reworded. It's fascinating to have, this is black and white. This is the real deal. And
I don't know that some of the other translations are going to update them, and that's more about the publisher and the publisher's desire to keep that old message.
We know the truth.
We know the truth. Exactly.
We know the truth.
Yeah.
And so, Gretchen, I can't thank you enough. And you have a private Facebook group. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, I do have a co-ed private Facebook group. You have to request membership. There are 4 questions. It's called the Life Saving Divorce Private Group. Now, you'll also see that I have a page called Life Saving Divorce, but this is actually a private group. So if you go to my website, you will find at the bottom of my blog post some information about and a link you can click to request membership. But everything that I've said today is also on my website. So if you would like to see a table showing 21 different Bible translations, what year they were translated, and how they translated Malachi 2:16, who did the hating and what was being hated. You'll find that on my website, and a lot of other, all the information about children and divorce, how 8 and 10 turn out just like their peers from two parent families. And so I think meaning average, very well, or even exceptional. So all that kind of data is on my website, and we talk about it a lot.
What is your website?
Sorry. I'm glad you asked. It's lifesavingdivorce.com. Okay. Lifesavingdivorce.com. And I've got a lot on there on Bible verses, on the outcomes of children, and I talk about some of the unhelpful Christian books that have been written, and some of the myths we get told. So be sure to look for my 27 myths of divorce that don't apply to most devout Christians.
I'm on your website, and just today I saw that reference to focus on the family. I remember when I first reached out to you, the Stephen Crowder video.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's unfortunate. I don't want to say it's amazing. It's unfortunate, but truth be told, and people, so they can find you on Facebook. They can join your private Facebook group, which is a group for people to go in and search for topics and connect with other people that are going through a divorce and find support, probably from you and from others, correct?
Right. It's a 5,000 member group.
Wow.
I have 7 moderators.
Okay.
So, and to be honest with you, the group dynamic is amazing. Many of these people have got so much life experience, and many of them are a little further along the path than some of the newer people. So when someone says, my child said this to me, what should I do? I mean, you're going to get 50 answers.
I love it.
And you can kind of see, you can push back. You can say, well, I don't really like that. Why do you say that? And you can see all the different viewpoints people have. It is so helpful. And it's also a place you can go and say, I'm considering a divorce. And nobody's going to jump down your throat and point their finger at you and say, you're destroying your children, or divorce is a sin, or, we're a place where you can get clarity, where you can get support. And you can think it through for yourself and make your own decision. But I will say that in our group, nearly 9 in 10, I did a survey and I asked the people in the group, does at least one of your children believe, is at least one of your children glad that you got divorced? Which is that's a powerful question. Now I ask it that way because some people have like 10, 12 kids. We have a lot of homeschoolers in our group. And so you can't expect like all 12 of them. But not nearly 9 in 10 said, yes, at least one of my children is very glad that I got a life-saving divorce.
Mhm.
And, that totally flies in the face of everything we're told by, some of these Christian organizations that just want to scare you into staying.
Yeah,
And some of these Christian authors, they don't know, but they've never asked the question
right.
of the child of an abused wife or an abused husband. Are you happy that your parent is out of there? Those kids say, yeah. So 1 in 10 doesn't,
One.
9 in 10 do.
That's amazing. Thank you. Gretchen, this really truly has touched my heart. It is everything I believe. And I feel so honored to have had you to be able to share your knowledge and your research. And I hope that everybody that is, I don't want people to get divorced, but if they need a life-saving divorce, then, there's support out there, especially with your Facebook group and your website. Again, I would highly encourage everyone just to start there. So I thank you for being here. And I want to thank the audience for watching, and I hope that everyone has a blessed day.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Rebuild with Confidence Divorce Summit. I appreciate your participation, and I'm proud of you for leaning in to your healing journey. If you're ready to take the next step towards rebuilding with confidence, book a discovery call with me at secondactcoaching.com. Together, we'll uncover the strategies and resources to help you start the rebuilding process and create a life you are excited about. Remember, you are not alone. We're here to support you every step of the way. Take care, my friend, and remember, there's always hope for a brighter future, and the best is yet to come.